Sometime between the late 1940s and the early 1950s, a radio message reportedly began circulating through the Strait of Malacca. It was not a typical distress call. It did not mention visible fire, collision, or mechanical failure. It was something far more unsettling. According to later accounts, radio operators on nearby ships intercepted a Morse code transmission from a cargo vessel called Ourang Medan. The fragmented message allegedly read something like, "All officers including the captain are dead, lying in the chart room and on the bridge. Probably whole crew dead." And then, after a pause, one final line, "I die." If this transmission truly occurred, it would rank among the most disturbing distress signals ever associated with maritime history. But here lies the first crucial point. There are no widely accepted contemporary official records conclusively confirming the existence of a ship named Ourang Medan. No clear, verifiable naval registry entries. No definitive port records confirming formal registration. The story primarily emerges from articles published years later, particularly in maritime magazines and bulletins. That does not automatically make it false, but it does mean we are dealing with a case shrouded in documentary uncertainty. According to the most circulated versions, after the distress signal was received, a vessel, often identified as the American cargo ship Silver Star, responded and located the Ourang Medan drifting in the Strait of Malacca. What was allegedly discovered aboard is what transformed the story into maritime legend. Accounts claim that the boarding party found the entire crew dead. Bodies scattered across the bridge, the engine room, and the decks. No visible injuries. No apparent structural damage to the ship. Some versions describe faces frozen in expressions of terror, eyes open, arms extended as if attempting to defend themselves from something unseen. But this is where the story demands caution. These dramatic descriptions do not appear in verifiable contemporary official reports. They surface mainly in later publications, particularly a Dutch magazine article in Zeeskipvaart in the late 1940s, followed by retellings in the 1950s. There are no widely recognized British or Dutch maritime archives that definitively confirm the incident in such detail. In the most dramatic versions, as a tow line was being prepared, a sudden explosion reportedly erupted aboard the Ourang Medan, followed by fire. The vessel then supposedly sank quickly, eliminating any possibility of formal investigation. If such an explosion occurred, it would have destroyed the evidence. But again, the absence of solid contemporary documentation raises significant doubts. Some researchers suggest the story may have originated from amplified rumor or from a poorly documented real incident. Others propose that, if something did happen, it might have involved hazardous cargo transported illegally, such as toxic chemicals capable of causing sudden death without leaving obvious external injuries. Hypotheses have included leaks of gases like carbon monoxide, hydrogen cyanide, or other volatile substances that could produce rapid fatal poisoning. Yet none of these explanations have been officially confirmed. What remains, therefore, is a peculiar case in maritime lore. A terrifying distress message. A ship supposedly found with its crew dead. A subsequent explosion that allegedly erased the evidence. And a fragmented, inconsistent documentary trail. The story of the Ourang Medan is not a closed case. It is an enigma. And perhaps it is precisely the absence of solid records that has made this supposed distress call one of the most chilling ever associated with the sea. What sustains the story of the Ourang Medan is not widely verified official port documentation, but later publications that began circulating several years after the alleged incident. One of the earliest known references appeared in 1948 in a Dutch maritime periodical called Zeeskipvaart. Later, in 1952, a German magazine titled Das Neue Universum published a more elaborate version of the case, adding dramatic details. It is from these sources that the narrative takes shape. According to these accounts, after the mysterious Morse code transmission, a rescue vessel located the Ourang Medan drifting in the Strait of Malacca. Upon boarding, the crew allegedly discovered a disturbing scene. All crew members dead, including the radio operator who had sent the final message, "I die." The captain was reportedly found on the bridge. Other officers were said to be scattered across the deck and in the engine room. But what stands out is not merely the collective deaths. It is the absence of formal documentation that would normally accompany a maritime incident of such magnitude. Ships that send distress signals typically leave administrative traces. Insurance records, investigation reports, crew manifests, Port Authority communications. In the case of the Ourang Medan, such records are extremely scarce or entirely absent from the naval archives most frequently consulted by historians. There is no unequivocal confirmation of the ship's official registration under that name in Dutch or British maritime records of the period. This raises a significant possibility. The vessel may have operated under irregular registration, a flag of convenience, or incomplete formal documentation, not impossible in the immediate post-war period, particularly in Southeast Asia. At the time, the Strait of Malacca was one of the busiest trade routes in the world. It was also a region where commercial activities were not always fully transparent. Smuggling and the transport of sensitive cargo were not unknown. Some of the more rational hypotheses suggest that, if an incident did occur, it may have involved hazardous cargo transported illegally. Chemical substances such as hydrogen cyanide or volatile nitro compounds could, in theory, release toxic gases under certain conditions of heat and humidity. Inhalation might cause rapid death, possibly without obvious external signs. Another hypothesis involves carbon monoxide accumulation in enclosed areas of the ship, especially in the event of ventilation failure. Carbon monoxide poisoning can cause silent death, often without visible injuries. But these remain technical hypotheses. None have been proven. The most dramatic element of the story, the explosion that allegedly sank the ship before any formal investigation could be conducted, is particularly problematic from a historical standpoint. If the vessel truly exploded and sank after the rescue crew boarded it, that would have eliminated physical evidence. Yet again, there is no widely recognized official report documenting such an explosion in detail. It is possible the case represents a poorly documented real event later amplified by sensational retellings. It is also possible that it is a maritime legend shaped by mid-20th century publications, a period when mysterious sea stories found eager audiences. The phrase attributed to the radio operator, "All officers are dead. I die," is too powerful to ignore. It captures absolute fatal isolation. But its authenticity depends entirely on indirect sources that transmitted it. What we know with certainty is that there is no solid, contemporary documentation fully validating the narrative as it is commonly told. And yet the story persists. Perhaps because the sea itself is a theater of uncertainty. It preserves mysteries. It swallows evidence. It turns tragedies into rumors when records are lost, incomplete, or never created. The Ourang Medan has become part of modern maritime folklore, a case suspended between the plausible and the improbable, between technical explanation and legend. The distress message attributed to the ship remains one of the most chilling ever cited in naval lore. But its concrete existence remains shrouded in documentary shadows. And it is precisely at that boundary, between incomplete fact and enduring myth, that the case continues to fascinate. Over the decades, maritime researchers and historians have attempted to trace the story of the Ourang Medan back to its earliest documented source. What they found was not a detailed naval archive or a preserved government inquiry, but rather a chain of secondary publications referencing one another. The central problem of the case is not a complete absence of mentions, it is the absence of verifiable primary documentation. Merchant ships, particularly in the post-Second World War period, typically left administrative trails, registration records, crew lists, insurance contracts, cargo manifests. Even minor incidents generated official communications. In the case of the Ourang Medan, these records do not clearly appear in the traditional maritime archives consulted by researchers. Some suggest that the ship may have operated under a flag of convenience, possibly with irregular or incomplete documentation. Southeast Asia in the late 1940s was a region in political transition, with administrative systems still being reorganized after the end of the global conflict. This could explain fragmented records. But there is another, more direct possibility. The story may have been amplified over time from an incomplete, or even fictional, account. Contemporary researchers point out that many sensational maritime stories circulated in the post-war era, particularly in popular magazines. The ocean has always been fertile ground for mystery narratives. Ghost ships, unexplained transmissions, vanishings without witnesses. Such elements capture the collective imagination. The Ourang Medan fits perfectly within that tradition. The final phrase attributed to the radio operator, "I die," is almost literary in structure. It is direct, stark, dramatically effective. It is the kind of detail that anchors a story in cultural memory. But it is also the kind of detail that can be shaped and sharpened through repeated retellings. There is no original recording of the transmission. No widely recognized official contemporary transcript. No preserved formal investigative report. The case remains suspended between possibility and myth. This does not mean that nothing happened. Accidental poisoning from toxic cargo is technically plausible. Chemical leaks can cause rapid, silent death. Invisible gases can kill without leaving obvious external signs. But plausibility is not proof. What distinguishes the Ourang Medan from other documented maritime cases is precisely this documentary gap. When the Titanic sank, formal investigations followed immediately. When submarines attacked convoys, reports were filed. When ships disappeared, insurers documented losses. In the case of the Ourang Medan, the narrative survives more in magazines than in naval archives. And perhaps that is exactly what makes the story so persistent. The sea has always carried an element of mystery. It erases traces. It consumes evidence. It turns tragedies into legends when there are too few witnesses or insufficient documentation. The idea of a ship found with its entire crew dead, no visible injuries, and then destroyed by an explosion before any formal investigation is almost too perfect as an enigma. It is an ideal script for perpetuation. The distress message attributed to the ship continues to be cited as one of the most frightening ever associated with seafaring, not because of incontestable documentary confirmation, but because of its narrative power. In the end, the Ourang Medan represents something larger than the factual certainty of a specific incident. It represents the boundary between history and maritime folklore, between what may have happened and what was told. And at sea, that boundary has always been blurred. What makes the case of the Ourang Medan so resistant to time is not the amount of evidence. It is the absence of it, combined with a narrative too powerful to fade away. In maritime history, documentary gaps are not uncommon. Ships have sunk without complete records. Crews have vanished in distant seas. Archives have been lost during wars, political transitions, and administrative reorganizations. But even within that context, the Ourang Medan remains particularly elusive. Modern researchers who have attempted to trace the ship's name in international registries have encountered inconsistencies. The name Ourang Medan can be translated as Man of Medan, referencing the city of Medan in Indonesia. This suggests a possible regional link. Yet there is no widely recognized, unequivocal record of a cargo vessel officially registered under that name in the traditional maritime databases of the era. This raises a crucial question. Are we dealing with a poorly documented real incident, or with a narrative construction that took on a life of its own? The hazardous cargo hypothesis remains the most frequently cited rational explanation among those who believe something may indeed have occurred. In the post-Second World War period, sensitive chemical materials were transported, sometimes under secrecy or with incomplete documentation. If a vessel had been carrying volatile substances such as nitroglycerin, cyanide compounds, or other industrial agents, a containment failure could have caused rapid fatalities. Gases like hydrogen cyanide, for example, can act quickly on the nervous system, leading to death in a short time frame. Carbon monoxide can cause silent asphyxiation. Leaks in poorly ventilated compartments could affect an entire crew, especially if the event occurred at night. But even this hypothesis faces a fundamental obstacle. There is no formal technical report confirming a specific cargo or cause of death. No physical evidence. No preserved investigation. No complete naval record. What remains is the narrative. And the narrative is powerful. A radio operator alone, sending a final message. Officers dead on the bridge. Silence after, I die. A ship drifting. A rescue crew finding bodies without explanation. A sudden explosion erasing the evidence. Each element contributes to the construction of a modern maritime myth. The sea has always been a space of human projection. Since the age of great explorations, stories of ghost ships, unexplained disappearances, and cryptic transmissions have circulated among sailors. Isolation, vastness, and constant danger create fertile ground for accounts that blur the line between fact and imagination. The Ourang Medan fits within that tradition, not as a proven case, but as a persistent enigma. Perhaps the most interesting aspect of the story is not determining whether it is entirely true or partially constructed. Perhaps it is understanding why it continues to be repeated. The message attributed to the ship captures a primordial fear of the sea, dying in isolation without witnesses, with something unseen approaching. It is the terror of the unknown in its purest form. And the absence of a clear official conclusion only amplifies that effect. In a modern world that demands documentation, reports, protocols, and formal investigations, the Ourang Medan remains a shadow. It reminds us that not every maritime event was preserved with equal precision. That not every tragedy left behind a detailed archive. And in that shadow the message echoes. All officers are dead. I die. Whether literal fact or amplified narrative, it has become part of global maritime imagination. When we examine it objectively, the Ourang Medan occupies a rare territory in naval history. It is not solidly confirmed, yet it has not been definitively dismantled as fabrication. It exists in that intermediate space where the silence of archives allows a narrative to breathe. Maritime stories often emerge from fragments. A radio operator hears something unusual. One ship finds another drifting. A fire destroys documents. A record is never properly archived. Decades later, someone gathers these scattered pieces and publishes an account that gradually acquires dramatic contours. The Ourang Medan may have been exactly that, a real event, poorly documented, amplified through successive retellings. Or it may have been a story constructed from maritime rumors that later solidified in print. The fact remains that no widely recognized naval investigation produced a conclusive report on the case. No official archive details a formal rescue operation involving all the elements described in the most popular versions. No major maritime insurer clearly records a corresponding loss under that name. And yet, the story has not disappeared. Because it touches something fundamental in the human imagination. The sea is an environment where human technology meets its limits. Radio can fail. Ships can vanish beyond visual range. Explosions can occur far from witnesses. Currents can carry wreckage into uncharted waters. In a setting like the Strait of Malacca, busy, yet complex and historically marked by conflict and irregular trade, documentary gaps are not impossible. The problem is that without robust primary documentation, any reconstruction becomes speculative. The famous message attributed to the Ourang Medan remains the central element. Its power lies not only in its content, but in its structure. First the collective declaration, all are dead, followed by the final, individual sentence, I die. It is almost theatrical in progression. It is exactly the kind of construction that lodges in cultural memory. Perhaps that is why it endures. Throughout the 20th century, maritime mysteries found a home in popular magazines and collections of unexplained phenomena. The Ourang Medan was frequently included alongside ghost ship tales and inexplicable disappearances. Over time, repetition solidified the narrative. What began as a secondary report became a recurring reference. But repetition does not equal verification. Modern historians tend to classify the case as unverified, possibly apocryphal or amplified beyond its original basis. Some believe there may have been an incident involving clandestinely transported chemicals or explosives, followed by an explosion that erased evidence and documentation. Others are more skeptical and suggest the story may have been constructed entirely from unconfirmed sources. What remains undeniable is the symbolic power of the story. A ship adrift. A crew dead without clear explanation. A final message transmitted to the world. An explosion that erases evidence. Silence in the archives. That combination is nearly perfect as a modern maritime myth. In the end, the Ourang Medan represents the gray zone between history and legend. It reminds us that not every event attributed to the sea is fully documented. But it also reminds us that without solid evidence, narrative fascination must be separated from verified fact. The distress message attributed to the ship continues to be called one of the most terrifying ever sent, not because its authenticity is unquestionable, but because it encapsulates the primordial fear of fatal isolation. At sea, when the voice falls silent, the silence is absolute. And perhaps it is precisely that silence, more than any explosion or reported corpse, that keeps the story of the Ourang Medan alive. What makes this story particularly unsettling is not only the supposed scene found on board, but the very idea of a final human voice echoing over the radio before absolute silence. At sea, the radio has always been more than equipment. It is the link between isolation and rescue, between life and disappearance. A final message like the one attributed to the Ourang Medan carries deep emotional weight because it represents the last thread of connection before the void. If there truly was an operator transmitting those words, he would have been conscious of what was happening around him. He would have witnessed the deaths of the officers, perceived the collapse of the crew, and understood that there was no escape. The progression of the message suggests something gradual, not an instantaneous explosion. First the collective statement, then the personal acknowledgement of the end. But that interpretation depends on accepting the narrative as literal. When we examine the case through a critical lens, we see that the Ourang Medan may be a classic example of how maritime stories form. A real incident, perhaps involving sudden death from toxic gas, may have occurred. Fragmented reports may have circulated among sailors. A publication may have compiled these versions with a degree of dramatization. Other magazines may have reproduced the account. Over time, details crystallize and begin to be repeated as established facts. The sea is not an environment where evidence is easily preserved. Fires on board can destroy records. Explosions can eliminate documents. Sinkings in deep waters make investigation nearly impossible, especially in the 1940s when underwater search technology was limited. Even so, the absence of confirmation in official archives remains a significant obstacle to validating the case. Historians specializing in post-war commercial navigation often classify the Ourang Medan as unverified, possibly originating from sensational secondary sources. That does not diminish the impact of the story, but it places it in a different category from tragedies supported by robust documentation. The fascination endures because the narrative touches an ancestral fear: invisible death at sea. No storm described. No battle. No collision. Only silence. And silence on the ocean is always unsettling. The location attributed to the incident, the Estreito de Malaca, adds another layer to the mystery. It is a historically busy region, yet also marked by geopolitical complexity, dense trade routes, and episodes of smuggling. If a vessel operated under irregular documentation, it could vanish from records with relative ease, especially during the unstable post-war period. But again, that is hypothesis. What remains concrete is the cultural legacy of the story. The Ourang Medan has become a recurring example in compilations of maritime mysteries. The final message is quoted in books, documentaries, and online forums. The absence of an official conclusion fuels ongoing speculation. Perhaps the true enigma is not what happened on board, but why the story continues to be told with such force. In the end, the Ourang Medan represents something essential about our relationship with the sea. It reminds us that even in the age of radio and modern navigation, there were still zones of uncertainty. That not every transmission left an archived record. That not every tragedy generated a preserved report. The message attributed to the ship may or may not have been real in every detail. But the feeling it evokes is undeniably real. A final voice. A call that does not receive a sufficient answer. And then only the sound of the sea.